when Nebuchadnezzar has these repetitive dreams. And you remember that he is roughly 31 years old. Nebuchadnezzar, that is. I think Daniel's actually quite a bit younger still than that. He's about 31 years old. And in a monarchy, of course, this happens actually in every form of government, because we like the fact, right, that our executive branch has term limits. We wish that more people had term limits. But even if they had term limits, you realize that there's a whole pile of unelected people. And I'm not talking about cabinet members or whatever. Those get appointed fairly regularly. Some are kept, some are go. But there are lots of people that grease the wheels in that bureaucracy that get inherited, that may have decades and decades of a career because they're nameless. They're fairly powerful, influential there. And that is what I think is happening here with Nebuchadnezzar, that he has inherited from his father at a relatively young age some people that he does not feel that he can implicitly trust. And these dreams provide him an opportunity to test both their abilities and their loyalty, the reality of how competent they are actually and where their loyalty lies. And so that's how we have it here. The king replied to the Chaldeans, verse 5 of chapter 2, "The command from me is firm. If you do not make known to me the dream and its interpretation, you will be torn limb from limb, and your house will be made a rubbish heap." So that's a fairly severe response, in this case, to something that is fairly supernatural as far as the demand goes. Well, not fairly, distinctly supernatural. And that's the response that they come up with. There is not a man, verse 10, skipping down, the Chaldeans answered the king and said, "There is not a man on earth who could declare the matter for the king, inasmuch as no great king or ruler has ever asked anything like this of any magician, conjurer, or Chaldean." So, this is even just in interrogations, right? That's why they ask the same question 100 times over to see if your answer changes. They want to make sure that you're telling the truth, because nobody has a great enough memory to tell the truth the same exact way, or to tell the same lie 100 times over. They start changing, start breaking down. And so he's saying this is not within the natural capacity of a human being. And so the king gets angry, of course. He says, "Go ahead and start killing people. Start stacking the bodies up." And we find that Daniel is not included in that first council. Becky, they're not here yet this morning, made a point, which I agree with generally, that probably that was political in nature, that the people that Nebuchadnezzar inherited were not interested in having a 17 to 19-year-old kid who was 10 times better than them showing them up. That's almost ubiquitous in life, right? You put in your time, you pay your dues, whatever, and you don't really want to be told what to do by a kid in high school or a kid in college, right? I mean, that happens. As I've mentioned that in pastoral groups, that if somebody is 99 and you're 97, they will use their last dying breath to tell you how inexperienced and foolish you are because you are not 99 as they are. And that's probably part of what's happening here, why they're not present, why Daniel and his friends are not present. However, they're not exempted from the command. So they go, Arioch, this commander of the guard, comes to kill them. And he said, "Whoa, whoa, 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 hey, I'm a young guy, I got a long life to live. Can we talk about this? What's going on? Why is this so extreme all of a sudden?" So Daniel went and requested the king that he would have a little more time, which is a wise thing, right? I have a tendency, because I'm a fixer, I fix things. When I come into ministry, I fix things. When I go home, I fix things. When people tell me about their problems, I try to fix them. And generally I can, but there are some problems, right, that you do need to step back from. They're not as simple even as one of the most complex machines that I've ever worked on. It's not a circuit that can be fixed. And so Daniel wisely says, hey, we need to back up from this. We need to take our time. That's an example that we ought to follow. Currently, we are blessed with a very peaceful environment at El Paso Bible Church, but in a church that has been around 50 years, you can go back and read years where that was not the case, right? And one of the most common comments of communication, written communication that would be in that file, because years ago I went through the whole thing, right? Because I'm a glutton for punishment, man. I love it. Eat it up with a spoon, right? So I read those things, and the most common refrain and written communication in times of distress, especially here at El Paso Bible Church in all those years, was, we don't think the elders are doing something. They need to do something. They're not doing anything. Well, that wasn't true, for one thing. They were doing things. But wisely, not engaging in a double knee-jerk reaction to most things, praying about things, seeking the Lord. Daniel has learned that lesson early in his life. He is truly an exceptional young man, not common among young men of his age. So, gets his buddies, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, has a prayer service. They might request favor from God concerning this mystery, so that Daniel and his friends would not be destroyed with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. He is blatantly seeking his own best interest, by the way. That statement does not say he was really hoping all the Chaldeans, conjurers, and magicians weren't also killed. He wants to make sure that he and his friends were not killed with the other wise men of Babylon. So, the mystery was revealed. We're here at verse 19. Mystery was revealed to Daniel in a night vision. If you come to me and tell me what I must do in my life in a night vision, people, that's not going to work, because you're not Daniel, and I'm not Nebuchadnezzar, and we don't have this situation, right? But this is how it was revealed to Daniel. I have had people come and tell me that, by the way. I had a dream last night. It told me this is what you ought to do. Usually the dumbest possible thing one could ever think of doing in any situation comes into my office that way. So I have some experience with that. I don't just say that because I'm categorically denying that it could ever happen. Daniel said this. He sings a hymn. Let the name of God be blessed forever and ever. He acknowledges his sovereignty. Remember, the sovereignty that he is talking about is expressed in this context of discipline for Israel. He removes kings and establishes kings. He gives wisdom to wise men. Everybody who gets wisdom gets it from him. We know that is repeated in James chapter 1, when James teaches that this is a truth for us as well, right? That if anyone lacks wisdom, he should ask for it from the Father who gives it without reproach, right? He gives it freely. He doesn't say to you, as some earthly fathers would do, dummy, why didn't you already know that? He gives you wisdom without reproach. And Daniel acknowledges it's he who reveals the profound and hidden things. He knows what is in the darkness. The light dwells with him. So then he goes, verse 24. We've read all of those verses. Let's read from verse 24 from the text rather than review in summary. Therefore Daniel went into Arioch, whom the king had appointed to destroy the wise men of Babylon. He went and spoke to him as follows. Do not destroy the wise men of Babylon. Take me into the king's presence, and I will declare the interpretation to the king. Then Arioch hurriedly brought Daniel into the king's presence and spoke to him as follows. I have found a man among the exiles from Judah who can make the interpretation known to the king. And the king said to Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, are you able to make known to me the dream which I have seen and its interpretation? Daniel answered before the king and said, as for the mystery about which the king has inquired, neither wise men, conjurers, magicians, nor diviners are able to declare it to the king. However, there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries, and he has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what will take place in the latter days. This was your dream and the visions in your mind while on your bed. As for you, O king, while on your bed, your thoughts turned to what would take place in the future. and he who reveals mysteries has made known to you what will take place. But as for me, this mystery has not been revealed to me for any wisdom residing in me more than in any other living man, but for the purpose of making the interpretation known to the king, and that you may understand the thoughts of your mind. So he says, I can do this. I'm the guy that has been given this information. It's not because I'm awesome. It's not because I'm incredible. What was the difference, right? Why were the Chaldeans, the magicians, the conjurers, they admitted why they couldn't do it. There's no man on earth that could do this, right? There's no man on earth that could tell you what you want to know. There's no man on earth that can get into your head. And Daniel agrees with them. Nobody could do it, and I can't do it in my function as a seer without this God in heaven who reveals mysteries. And he said, you've been given a privilege that you were seeking what would take place in the future, and God has given you that information, material that is in the latter days. Latter days, it's a common thing. If you go to what we call an ordination council or a licensing council, and you have people that you don't know that were invited by people that you don't like to come and ask you hard questions about the Bible, they'll ask you, are we in the last days or not? Right? They'll ask you silly questions. Who killed Jesus? Right? Different verses put that credibility in different places. They'll ask you, are we in the last days or not? And usually it's some non-dispensationalist that's asking you that question. In other words, the answer is always yes and no to them, because the interpretation is allegorical if you are non-dispensational. What are the latter days? Well, in Nebuchadnezzar's context, right, this is not a hugely detailed amount of information he's been given. He's been given enough content that he can remember it in his dreams. Do you remember your dreams? We talked about that. You get impressions most of the time. Nebuchadnezzar has had this dream repetitively, so he remembers some detail, but it's an amount of detail that can be communicated in a dream. And so he's got that. And he who reveals mysteries has made known to you what will take place. It's important to understand what will happen in the future, whether you are a pagan king or a believer in Jesus Christ. But Daniel acknowledges that I have been placed in this position at this time so that you can have this information made known to you and that you may understand it. Now, I tried to make a copy of this thing. This is from Larkin, Clarence Larkin. Doesn't he sound like a theologian to you? That sounds like a good theologian name. Dr. Clarence Larkin. The copyright on this book, this is called The Greatest Book on Dispensational Truth in the World, written by the most humble man. Have you ever read that passage about Moses? When Moses wrote that sucker, and Moses was the most humble man on earth. As they say, my congregation, a pastor friend of mine always says that his congregation gave him a humility award, being the most humble pastor ever, but as soon as he accepted it, they took it away. Right, so I don't know who wrote that. This is the 100th anniversary edition. This was copyrighted in 1918. And so there's some information in there that might be relevant that we don't have in here. But if you have been in church a long time, and you've been in a dispensational church, you'll have seen a pencil drawing somewhat similar to this. I don't know if y'all can all see that. Tried to make a copy of it, but our copier doesn't make copies this big, apparently. So I'm going to have to get a bigger version of it.
I think there's a poster from a VBS in the...
There may be. Okay, so this is a picture of what Nebuchadnezzar saw, and it's quite interesting. So we'll reference this and why some of this information is a little bit strange, and others of it is not. So Larkin is a known dispensationalist. Everybody who is a dispensationalist today is familiar with the information that he taught. But if you look at his rendering of this statue that we're going to talk about, the kingdoms that it represents, all of a sudden when he gets down to the legs, he starts talking about the Eastern and the Western church. What? Now, there's some interesting interplay there, right? That says, uh-oh, what are you going to do, Tammy? You going to try to make a copy? Oh, you're going to write this down? Okay. Oh, up there. Oh, maybe you can do that. I don't know. I don't ask this stuff. I'm the least organized person ever in the whole world, guys. So I forget to ask things that I need ahead of time. So let's be clear when we go through this. These are kingdoms that we're talking about, right? And the church is not a kingdom, and so we're not going to blur that distinction. Dispensationalism has refined itself, especially over its understanding of Scripture as time goes on and history carries on. So here in verse 31 of chapter 2, it says, "You, O king, were looking." So he's got to tell the dream, right? You got to tell the dream, you got to interpret the dream. This is what he's going to do. "You were looking, and behold, there was a single great statue. That statue, which was large and of extraordinary splendor, was standing in front of you, and its appearance was awesome." All right? So I was 12 years old at the end of the 80s. Some of y'all are going to be like, "Oh my gosh, you're old." Some of you are going to be like, "Oh my gosh, I have socks older than you." I don't care. My point being was that in the 80s we said, "Awesome," a lot. And we really said it about things that were not awesome. We said it about things that were stupid. We said it about clothes that incorporated burlap sacks from potatoes. We said it about people who carried around enough potato starch in their hair that they could make it into very strange shapes all the time. We said it about guys who only knew 3 chords on the guitar but could play them really loud with a lot of distortion. Stupid stuff. Most people that say the word awesome today say it still about stupid stuff. When he says the statue was awesome, we're talking on the order of the wonders of the world awesome. I remember it's a dream that he had. It's not a physical statue in this case, right? But he's seeing this saying this was a common representation of a kingdom, was to represent the leader, but this is a unique representation. But it was awesome. It was something that all of us would look at and go, "Oh my goodness, that is amazing. That is incredible." Massive, the size. I mean, have you thought about that? Even things of lesser quality than this big statue, lesser detail. Just from what I understand, like the pyramids, right? You go and there's pyramids all over. The ones that you recognize were the perfection of the pyramid, right? And they cut these massive stone blocks with hand saws. And many of y'all don't know how to use a tape measure, so you don't know how impressive this is. But you cut a block of stone with a handsaw, you drag it across the desert, you stack it in place, you measure it without a modern tape measure, you stick it in there, and thousands of years later, you cannot stick a dollar bill between most of the blocks because they're that tight. It's nothing compared to the awesomeness of this statue. Nothing. I mean, those things are amazing, but they're not this amazing. They're awesome. This is awesome. And his head. And the head of the statue, he says, was made of fine gold. Its breast and its arms of silver, its belly and its thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. So all of a sudden, our awesome statue, when we look a little closer, looks a little strange. I had a friend when I was in seminary. He was actually my boss. He had recently graduated from Dallas Seminary, but I worked for him, named John. He's now a pastor in North Carolina. And he was remodeling his home down in downtown Dallas. Central Dallas, not downtown Dallas. Very close to downtown. Historic area. And they had added on to this brick home. Y'all know there's only 2 kinds of houses in North Texas, right? Those that have had foundation repair and those that need it. It's on like 27 feet of clay that gets hydrated in all sorts of weird ways, and it doesn't matter. You're going to have to fix your concrete. So he had part of the house, the original part of the house was in pretty good shape. It had had foundation repair. Brick and stone. And then some dummy had added an addition onto it on a pier and beam foundation. Y'all ever built a pier and beam foundation? I have. You got to be actually a little more skilled than a guy who just slathers concrete on the ground and scrapes it level. There's some actual woodworking involved in that, and that's my wheelhouse. Problem was, pier and beam moves a lot compared to the concrete. The concrete already has problems. The pier and beam moves at a different rate. And so his biggest problem was, what do I do with that addition over there? And I don't know what he ever fixed it, how he ever fixed it. It's a common problem. Why? Because you have materials that aren't matched. They're not mixed. Or excuse me, they're not matched, and you're trying to mix them. You don't find normally somebody who's a woodworker intentionally gluing steel into their furniture. That's the difference. Most of the furniture, if you go to like IKEA and you compare that furniture to your dishwasher, they're built the same way. They're a furniture-shaped object, a furniture-shaped appliance. And you can't join two dissimilar materials like that. I just fixed a chair for somebody. It had a 3/4-inch tenon in the chair and had a 1/4-inch square nail driven right through it, because nobody wanted to bother putting glue to join the like materials. They just created a wedge and split the wood. So we're looking at this awesome statue, right? And it's all glued together of all these wonky materials. How'd you get that to stick together? All of a sudden, it's pretty mysterious, right? Nobody builds statues like this. Maybe communists. There may be some over in the Eastern Bloc countries that build statues like that. They told their people to sow seeds on snow, so all bets are off. But nobody in their right mind who's building an awesome statue, puts this many resources into it, would build it this way. Put the heaviest part on top. Top heavy. Put the gold, the head of fine gold. Its breast and its arms of silver. Its belly and its thighs of bronze. You can get those things to stick together okay. Legs of iron. Feet partly of iron and partly of clay. All of a sudden we start to wonder what's going on with this statue. Doesn't make sense. Legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. So he keeps looking. This is still the description of the dream. You continued looking until a stone was cut out without hands, and it struck the statue on its feet of iron and clay and crushed them. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were crushed all at the same time and became like chaff from the summer threshing floors. And the wind carried them away so that not a trace of them was found. But the stone that struck the statue became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. Wow, how do we do that? I don't know if we can read that. There's this. Okay, this is Larkin's statue here. He's got it in there sideways. Where he breaks it down, you probably can't tell. And I will try to get a copy of this, or I'll try to get something that is more legible. But those two legs, he puts the great schism, if you know your church history, right under this guy's skirt. And let's be honest, it's a skirt. Men wore skirts back then. The Western church and the Eastern church here on these legs as kingdoms. And you know that especially in the Western church, that there was some incongruity, right? They did view themselves as a government. They still view themselves as a government, but they're not the only ones. Actually, their theology says that they are the kingdom and they ought to rule the earth, and we should all be thankful that they don't, because when they did, it was terrible. But the kingdom theologies, we talked about that last week. That kingdom theology is not unique to Roman Catholicism. There are many cults that have that same kingdom theology. Mormonism is one. They believe that the new heaven and the new earth and the new Jerusalem is going to be somewhere like around Pittsburgh, or I don't know, somewhere. They believe that that's here. And they believe that they ought to be the government and they ought to rule the country, and that it is good and right for them to seek that out. That's not a problem until you have a democratic government and you have the fastest growing religion in half of the states of the United States is Mormonism, right? That ends up really affecting your electorate. It's a real problem to confuse kingdoms and the church, right? Because the description here, and this is important for that, the description here, see, these are the kingdoms of the earth, right? So he's still telling the dream. The big stone, uncut, without hands. Isn't that really impressive? When you see things that were done without human hands. Behind our house in Spring Branch, we had a wet weather creek bed. But it wasn't always just a wet weather creek bed. It was a waterfall. It had originally been a cave, and it had collapsed in on itself. But the waterfall still ran. Beautiful. Beautiful lagoon down there, green. Looked like something you would never find in Texas. No human hand touched it. You can drive down I-10 towards Arizona. Once you get into Arizona, there are these beautiful rock formations that were touched without hands. Just on the side of the road. I have pictures of them right there. And that's what he sees. Creation, an uncut stone. So you look at the statue, right? And this is the contrast. You look at the statue and wow, that's a lot of human hands. That's a lot of detail. Somebody really had to know what they're doing, but they were stupid because they put gold, silver, iron, and bronze, or gold, silver, bronze, and iron on top of feet of clay trying to glue it to iron, right? It's really awesome. It's the best. It's the best and the brightest thing that any human being could ever create. That's the idea. It is awesome. It's incredible. And this uncut stone smacks it on the feet, brings the whole thing down. Strikes the image on the feet. All the materials ground and crushed, all at the same time. You ever watched the show Forged in Fire? The blacksmithing competition? They have a power hammer on there that would kill you if you stuck your hand in it. It's amazing. Call it Big Blue. Push the pedal, and you stick this molten steel in there, and all of a sudden you can draw it out, and it's 4 times longer than it started. But if you used it at the same settings and you stuck gold under there, it would drive a hole through it. Because gold is soft. Silver, soft. Bronze gets a little harder. Iron is harder still. Amazing amounts of pressure required to take all of these mixed materials and destroy them, crush them, grind them. Not just break it down, like it's not going to be like, Charlton Heston in the original Planet of the Apes, right? Where he's still at the end, sees the Statue of Liberty still standing. Ah! Nothing. No remnant of what humanity created when this is done. Tremendous amounts of pressure. The uncut stone. The wind carries it away. I don't know how finely you have to grind gold for the wind to be able to pick it up. I didn't know wind was a weather event until I moved here. We had tornadoes where I'm from. We had tornadoes up in North Texas, tornadoes in Spring Branch. But, you could see it. It starts to rotate. Y'all are from North Texas. You can stand out on your front porch and watch one think about it. Well, it wasn't until that point that you had a real problem. But just straight wind here will rip your roof off. And you don't want to be burning things on the wrong day. You find that whole trees and stuff turn into that. But that's the idea. It's just like burning cardboard in your backyard. It just blows away. All of it. Nothing left. So that's one of the reasons why I say that mixing the kingdom theology with the church theology is a real problem. Right? Because, say, Mitt Romney and his buddies intend to have some remnant of the kingdom that they created be part of this kingdom. Well, what Daniel sees is, no, it's all new, and it's all God, and it all comes in at one time. and it fills the whole earth. So here's the interpretation. I've been interpreting as we go, right? But that's the general interpretation. He's going to draw it down to Nebuchadnezzar, because Nebuchadnezzar not only wants to know what it means for the future, but he wants to know what part he plays in it at 31 years of age, roughly. This was the dream, verse 36. Now we will tell its interpretation before the king. You, O king, are the king of kings. Small k's there, but that's in English. To whom the God of heaven has given the kingdom, the power, the strength, and the glory. And wherever the sons of men dwell, or the beasts of the field, or the birds of the sky, he has given them into your hand and has caused you to rule over them all. You are the head of gold in the statue. Now, that's kind of cool. You're the head of gold. Guess what falls the fastest and the hardest? The thing at the top, right? What do we say? The bigger they are, the harder they fall. You say that you're the head of gold. You're certainly the most majestic one in these kingdoms. After you, there will arise another kingdom inferior to you, then another kingdom of bronze, which will rule over all the earth. I mean, they may not be as wise. They may not be as glorious. They may not be as effective, but they are going to be effective enough to rule over all the earth. Then there will be a fourth kingdom, as strong as iron. Inasmuch as iron crushes and shatters all things, so like iron that breaks in pieces, it will crush and break all these in pieces. They're not going to coexist. And that you saw the feet and toes, partly of potter's clay and partly of iron. It will be a divided kingdom, but it will have in it the toughness of iron, inasmuch as you saw the iron mixed with common clay. As the toes of the feet were partly of iron and partly of pottery, so some of the kingdom will be strong and part of it will be brittle. And in that you saw the iron mixed with common clay, they will combine with one another in the seed of men, but they will not adhere to one another, even as iron does not combine with pottery. So you may have thought that I spent a lot of time talking about mixing different materials, but that's actually very key to what Daniel's interpretation is here. If you're going to mix materials, you have to have something, a third element in there. They don't just bind to each other. I mean, these are kingdoms. Subsequent kingdoms, all in chronological order. And this is some very basic information. He said this is looking forward. So remember that we talked about that there are some critics, and they start with the presupposition that there's no such thing as being able to tell the future. Right? There's no such. They start with that presupposition. And so then that presupposition demands that they say that this was written after this history had already come to fruition, right? So we're not going to start with that. That doesn't make sense to me. It's not historically accurate. It doesn't demonstrate anything other than that somebody doesn't take the Bible with its proper authority. He's saying these are kingdoms that are going to be extended beyond you, slightly less glorious. So, iron is quite a bit less glorious, right, than silver, gold, and even bronze. Gold doesn't tarnish at all. Silver has its own kind of tarnishing. Bronze has its own kind of oxidation. But if I'm a beekeeper and we use steel wool to keep bees from entering a hole that they like to go into. But steel wool isn't permanent, right? It just rusts. It rusts in like an hour. If you leave it outside in the rain, it rusts. So it's certainly less glorious, but it has its purposes. He explains this clay, this pottery, some of the kingdom will be strong, and part of it will be brittle. And I know that we have more information in later parts of Daniel to describe these kingdoms, but we're trying to take it as it was revealed, in the form that was revealed to Nebuchadnezzar. He's giving him this future. You are essentially the apex kingdom of these human kingdoms. There's going to be a mixed power, mixed strength. They will combine with one another in the seed of men. We'll talk about that some more in later parts of Daniel. But he says in verse 44, in the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which will never be destroyed. And that kingdom will not be left for another people. It will crush and put an end to all these kingdoms, but it will itself endure forever. Inasmuch as you saw that a stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and that it crushed the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold, the great God has made known to the king what will take place in the future. So the dream is true, and its interpretation is trustworthy. What has he revealed about the kingdom? How many times have you sung the song, "Build Your Kingdom Here"? Don't like it, so we don't sing it here very much. You hear it on the radio quite frequently, "Build your kingdom here, your kingdom here." What's another one that talks about that? This is such a common refrain in praise songs, praise choruses. You might as well sing that 80s ballad, "We Built This City on Rock and Roll." Voted the very worst song ever written in Western civilization by more people than I can count. Look, the point is that there's no hand that touched it. See, I'm not very efficient at cutting things, apparently. I cut myself when I cut things. If I try to cut the stone, one thing I can guarantee you is that is not the kingdom that will endure forever. The uncut stone comes in and destroys all remnants of the previous kingdom. There will be nothing left to inherit from it. It will crush and put an end to all these kingdoms, but it will itself endure forever. People have a real problem with understanding the kingdom this way. You really don't. Like, imagine that Daniel is telling him, Nebuchadnezzar, you may be the king of kings. You're the top dog. You're the guy that God is using right now. There's nobody that is untouched by your sovereignty, by your rule, by your interest, by your kingdom. Nobody, but it's not going to endure forever. Try telling that to somebody sometime. Tell them, the United States is not mentioned in Bible prophecy. You want somebody to call you a traitor, a communist, a dirtbag, a slimy, no good, nothing? All sorts of nasty names. You just tell them that. You don't have to, because I've already done it for you. I can tell you exactly what will happen. What do you mean the United States won't endure forever? God bless America. Yes, God bless America. Wonderful. It's great. It's not there. I have a friend who every year on, I believe it's July 4th, we should probably do it on March 2nd also, Texas Independence Day, in case you Cretans don't know what that is. But July 4th, he says, I just want to post a list of all of the Bible prophecy passages about the United States. Post it, and it's a blank whiteboard. There aren't any. Because this isn't just relevant to Nebuchadnezzar. It's relevant to everybody who's a part of any kingdom ever. Should you try to be wise about the way your input is engaged in our process? We happen to have, well, we have what used to be a republic. I'm not sure if it was really, honestly, a republic now. In fact, they recognized that the day they created this republic. You know, maybe apocryphal, but Benjamin Franklin comes out and the woman asks him, "What kind of government have we got, Mr. Franklin?" And he says, "A republic, if you can keep it." I could argue whether we have it yet or not. It doesn't matter. In the end, in the latter days, all the kingdoms get ground into pieces, destroyed and replaced. The good news is that it will itself endure forever. It doesn't need to be passed along. It does not suffer from the recurrence of history, right? If you don't read history, we say you're doomed to repeat it, but the corollary to that is if you do read history, you're doomed to sit by and watch while other people repeat it. We don't have that liability in the kingdom. It endures forever. It is free from the cycle of history because it was untouched by human hands. It's cut out of the mountain without hands, and it fills the whole earth. The dream is true, and its interpretation is trustworthy, and we are literally 5 seconds over time. Again. Can you believe that? I am talking as fast as a human can talk and expect another human being to understand him. Let's do these last few verses. Then King Nebuchadnezzar fell on his face and did homage to Daniel and gave orders to present him an offering and a fragrant incense. The king answered Daniel and said, "Surely your God is a God of gods and a Lord of kings and a revealer of mysteries, since you have been able to reveal this mystery." See, this is why I mentioned, just trying to tell people in the United States doesn't endure forever because they don't respond the way Nebuchadnezzar did at 31 years of age. King of kings, right? And he accepts this interpretation because it's an obvious demonstration of the Lord's power, of the God of heaven's power to tell him exactly what will happen, exactly what his dream was, and exactly what it means. It's an expression of faith as far as I'm concerned, as to what this God of heaven tells him. Because there's no king that I'm aware of that would tolerate, right? Somebody standing in his presence in his court. Your kingdom will not endure forever, right? We talked about that. The Chaldeans, the magicians, the conjurers. "Oh, king, live forever. You're an idiot. We hope you live forever, but this is stupid what you're asking us to do." Daniel doesn't pull any of that. Your kingdom is limited. It's going to be ground into dust, just with the rest of them. Nebuchadnezzar is really, in my opinion, an admirable man for a pagan. Then the king promoted Daniel and gave him many great gifts, and he made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon and chief prefect over all the wise men of Babylon. And Daniel made request of the king, and he appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the administration of the province of Babylon, while Daniel was at the king's court. He gets promoted. Chief prefect over all the wise men of Babylon. He doesn't have to suffer from politics anymore. He can invite himself into the king's court. Not something that he necessarily would have foreseen by himself, I don't think. All right, any questions or comments? We'll give 37 seconds for questions, comments, and accusations of heresy. Anybody? All right. You realize that I'm a patriot, right? And I love my country and would lay my life down for it right now. I just have to be biblical about it. I've been called all sorts of nasty names for being a dispensationalist that understands Daniel. Okay, let's pray. Father, we thank you for this day. We thank you for your word. We thank you for Daniel. And Father, we thank you for Nebuchadnezzar. We thank you that he was able to receive revelation directly into his mind, have it interpreted by your appointed interpreter and seer Daniel, and respond rightly to it. Father, we thank you for that. We thank you for your sovereignty over history. We thank you for your coming kingdom. And Father, we look forward to it with anticipation.